What pushes someone to walk into a place where the sun vanishes for months and the cold can freeze your eyelids shut? A place where one wrong step means certain death. A century ago, two rival expeditions set out to conquer the last blank spot on the map, the South Pole. One leader's ruthless planning would lead to victory. The other's noble faith in honor would end in a frozen tomb. Their story forever defines the razor-thin line between heroism and hubris. In 1910, the race was on. On one side, Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen, a quiet and cunning strategist. He had publicly announced an Arctic expedition, but secretly he redirected his ship, the Fram, toward Antarctica. His crew were experts in polar survival, chosen for their skill with sled dogs, a decision that would prove critical. On the other side was British naval officer Robert Falcon Scott, leading the Terra Nova expedition. He represented the full might and pride of the British Empire. Scott envisioned a grand scientific journey built on courage, discipline, and gentlemanly conduct. Their starting points were different, their gear was different, and their entire philosophies were worlds apart. Amundsen's strategy was brutally practical. He relied on sled dogs, wore animal furs, and used survival techniques learned from the Inuit. He was there to win, not to make a statement. Scott, however, clung to a sense of moral superiority. He chose ponies over dogs, believing man-hauling the sleds was more honorable. He favored wool garments over furs, but the South Pole doesn't care about honor. Amundsen's team moved like a well-oiled machine. They set up supply depots at every degree of latitude, marked by a line of flags so they couldn't be missed. They moved fast. Scott's expedition, however, was in trouble almost from the start. The ponies sank into the deep snow and quickly grew exhausted. When they died, the men had to haul the heavy sleds themselves, a soul-crushing task in the relentless cold. On December 14, 1911, Amundsen's planning paid off. He and his 4 companions stood at the bottom of the world. They planted the Norwegian flag, verified their position, and left a tent with a note for Scott inside. Their mission was accomplished. They were alive and on their way home. Just over a month later, on January 17, 1912, Scott's exhausted party finally reached the pole. The sight that greeted them was devastating. The Norwegian flag already flapping in the wind. Great God! "This is an awful place," Scott wrote in his diary. The prize was already taken. All that was left was the brutal 800-mile journey back. What followed is one of the most heart-wrenching tragedies in the history of exploration. Temperatures plummeted far below anything they had prepared for. The men were starving, frostbitten, and exhausted. One by one, they started to fall. First was Edgar Evans, after a bad fall left him delirious. Then came Captain Lawrence Oates. His feet were so badly frostbitten he could barely walk. Realizing he was holding the others back, he calmly said, "I am just going outside and maybe some time," and walked out of the tent into a blizzard, sacrificing himself. He was never seen again. Scott, Henry Bowers, and Edward Wilson pushed on, but a ferocious blizzard trapped them in their tent just 11 miles away from their next supply depot, 11 miles from safety. They would never make it. Months later, a search party found their frozen bodies. Scott's hand was outstretched toward his diary, where he had documented their final, agonizing days. His last entry was a plea, "For God's sake, look after our people." The world mourned Scott as a national hero. His tragic failure became a symbol of noble British sacrifice. Amundsen, the victor, was admired, but his triumph felt less romantic. Over time, however, history's view began to shift. Amundsen wasn't just lucky. He was the better polar explorer. His victory was a masterclass in planning, adaptation, and respect for the brutal Antarctic environment. Scott's death remains a haunting lesson in the limits of human endurance. A reminder that courage alone is not enough to conquer the indifferent forces of nature. And so, two legends were born from the same ice. One of a man who won the race and lived, the other of a man who lost but achieved a different kind of immortality. In a strange way, perhaps both of them won. One claimed the pole, the other claimed a permanent place in our hearts. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, hit that subscribe button for more tales of history's greatest adventures.